Everyone knows Loki has a few tricks up his sleeve at all times, or wherever an Asgardian trickster god keeps his tricks.
Can't see into the future, I'm not a witch.
Those things are always in the last place you look for them, otherwise why keep looking? It certainly seemed as though his luck had run out when he went up against Thanos in Infinity War, and quite frankly, Endgame just raised more questions than it answered about his fate. It might be easy to assume Loki is off in another dimension drinking pina coladas and getting caught in the rain or whatever he does to relax. But could he have actually survived on the main MCU timeline? We all know there was a ton going on during Avengers Endgame, and at times things got a little bit hectic. You had Thor looking like the dude from The Big Lebowski, Captain America wielding Mjolnir, and whatever was going on with Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. Of course, when you have a movie that's the culmination of a decade of storytelling, it's gonna get a little bit busy, and that's before we even bring in the subject of time travel. Characters like Scott Lang and Rhodey tried their best to comprehend the way time travel works in the MCU, using various pop culture films as points of references. Bruce Banner laughed off the idea that time travel works the way it does in the Back to the Future franchise, and we just can't believe he'd insult Doc Brown like that. But he did explain the way time works in his fictional universe, even if it was a little bit difficult to understand. We think it's safe to say that most of us spent the movie feeling confident that those who perished in the decimation at the end of Avengers Infinity War would be coming back. After all, Spider-Man Far From Home was going to hit theaters soon, and they had announced sequels to Black Panther and Doctor Strange. Keeping the main characters of those franchises as piles of dust would have definitely been a bold move, but we don't think it would have sold movie tickets. Although we weren't sure exactly how the decimated were going to return, we fully expected them to come back. But there were some characters whose fate seemed way less certain because they didn't get dusted along with everyone else. In Infinity War, we saw several characters lose their lives prior to the decimation. Gamora was thrown off a cliff in Vormir, so Thanos could take the Soul Stone, and Heimdall and Loki were taken out by Thanos when he boarded the Asgardian ship. Would these characters be revived at some point in Endgame, or were they gone for good? We know that Gamora kind of came back, and that Gamora from 2014 was brought to the present-day MCU. We didn't see her on the ship with the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy, so it's safe to say her fate is kind of uncertain at the moment. But when Bruce Banner used the Infinity Gauntlet to undo the decimation, we didn't see Gamora or Heimdall show up. Bruce also told Tony that he tried to bring Natasha Romanoff back, but was unable to. The rules of the Infinity Stones are pretty ill-defined in the MCU, so we won't get into that right now because what we want to know is, where the heck is Loki? Yeah, it's sad the Gamora who lived through the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise is gone for good, never to be seen again, but we still have hope for Loki. What happened to Loki in Endgame was kinda confusing, and the movie didn't spend any time explaining it. We saw our heroes, Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Scott Lang, and Professor Hulk go back in time to the Battle of New York in order to collect the Infinity Stones. Tony and Scott were supposed to get the Space Stone, but they really ended up making a mess of the mission. Instead of going inside Thanos like many of us predicted, Scott ended up inside Tony's heart. That might almost sound sweet if we didn't mean he was literally inside of his heart. The plan went awry and Loki ended up in possession of the Tesseract for a brief moment. But that was all he needed. He grabbed the Tesseract and promptly disappeared. Now, we've seen the Tesseract pull the old switcheroo with people before. In Captain America: The First Avenger, it punked Red Skull by sending him to Vormir to guard the Soul Stone. At the time, we weren't sure what happened to him, but it certainly looked pretty bad. When Loki used the Tesseract in Endgame, it seemed pretty clear that Loki was in control, or at least as much as one can control one of those finicky Infinity Stones. So, where is he? Where did he go, and is he still alive? One obvious answer to this is that Loki is indeed still alive. He's just on an alternate timeline. When Bruce had a chat with the Ancient One, they discussed that removing an Infinity Stone from its place in time would create an alternate timeline, and probably not a very cheerful one. This is why we saw Steve Rogers heading back to return the Infinity Stones to their rightful places at the end of the movie. Well, that, and so he could pull a fast one and finally hook up with Peggy Carter. We wonder if Sharon Carter ever came up. Is Steve Rogers his own grandpa or his own uncle, as the case may be? Anyway, most of us probably just assume that Loki is now on an alternate timeline, which makes sense considering one of Disney's upcoming projects. We all know Disney is getting in on the streaming game with their Disney Plus platform. They're making a series of shows available exclusively on Disney Plus, including a show about Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson, Wanda Maximoff and Vision, and of course, Loki. He gets his own show because he's just the best. We assume there's some kind of prestidigitation involved with WandaVision, since poor Vision got taken out twice in Infinity War. So maybe both shows take place on some alternate timelines, which are similar to the MCU, but with distinct differences of having the protagonist still alive. It's also entirely possible Loki is not only still alive in an alternate universe somewhere, but that he still exists within the main MCU timeline. We all know Loki has faked his own demise before. Thor even mentioned it to the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he seemed confident that in Infinity War, his death was different, maybe even permanent. But the thing is, Loki has been known to fool Thor once or twice before. Seriously, does Loki ever fool anyone but Thor? He's supposed to be the trickster god, but most of the time, he just pranks his own brother. What makes us suspicious is the way Loki went out. No, the part about Thanos overpowering him wasn't shocking. Thanos is one of the most powerful beings in the entire universe, who punched the Incredible Hulk back into Bruce Banner. There's no way Loki could have defeated him in a one-on-one fight. But we also don't think there's any way Loki would ever go up against him mano-a-mano. And that's exactly what we saw in Infinity War. You might not think Loki is the most clever or charming guy in the MCU, and you'd be wrong. Dead wrong. But you're entitled to your wrong opinion. Dead wrong opinion. Even if you're not his biggest fan, you have to admit, he's not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. Prior to Infinity War, most of our heroes had never encountered Thanos. But let's not forget that Loki had. Thanos was the one who gave Loki the Mind Stone in the Avengers, and sent him on his mission to collect the Tesseract. Loki knew better than anyone just how powerful, malicious, and unforgiving Thanos was. He had to know there was no way Thanos was going to accept the Tesseract, along with his humble apologies, and act like everything was cool. Not only is the fact that Loki handed over the Tesseract kind of odd, but so was his behavior leading up to that moment. He made a big show about referring to himself as Odin's son, and pledging his undying loyalty to Thanos while giving Thor a meaningful look. It seemed like Loki knew he was going to perish when he handed over the Tesseract and did it anyway. But why? If he was just trying to save Thor, he could have at least tried some other kind of trickery, instead of his first option being to hit the self-destruct button. Is it possible that Loki knew what was going to happen during both Infinity War and Endgame, and that this was some sort of long con? In Thor Ragnarok, we know that Loki swiped the Tesseract from Odin's vault when he was supposed to be saving the day. Hey, he can multitask. Most of us dismiss this as just Loki being Loki by taking advantage of an opportunity, but what if there was a reason Loki grabbed the Tesseract beyond simple greed? We know that Endgame ended up with the day being saved despite insurmountable odds. Doctor Strange looked into 14,605 futures and saw only a single one where our heroes emerged triumphantly. So many factors had to align perfectly into place for that to happen, and it's clear the decimation happening the first time was an integral part of that plan. If things had been delayed, the events could have unfolded differently, and it could have turned into one of the many unsuccessful scenarios Doctor Strange saw. Perhaps Thanos had to get the Tesseract at that moment in time in order for things to play out perfectly. When Doctor Strange was time traveling, is it possible he could have filled Loki in on what was going to happen and what he intended to do? If you don't picture Loki as a sacrificial hero, consider that Doctor Strange likely saw Loki escaping with the Tesseract at another point in time. The Space Stone can do more than move people through space. It can also take them to different dimensions, and we know Loki escaped to another dimension when he grabbed the Tesseract in Endgame. Now that the threat of Thanos has been defeated, couldn't Loki just have come back to the main MCU timeline if he wanted to? We know it's kind of confusing, but Loki is both alive and not alive, and not in a Schrödinger kind of way. The present-day version of Loki did perish in Infinity War, but the Battle of New York Loki is still alive. It's like how Gamora and Thanos both perished, yet we saw the past versions of themselves travel to the future in Endgame, and they were still very much alive. Of course, the Loki that we saw escape in Endgame didn't have the same life experiences as the Loki who perished in Infinity War, so it would be interesting to see what kind of person he becomes. In the aftermath of the Avengers, many fans wondered just how much Loki had been influenced by the Mind Stone. Sure, he did bad things in the movie Thor, but he really ramped things up in the Avengers. Were we just trying to find some excuses for Loki, or did the Mind Stone really cause him to do things he wouldn't have otherwise? In the Dark World, Loki was detained and then was momentarily helpful before escaping. He knew Odin would have imprisoned him again, or worse, now that his mother Frigga was gone. So he usurped the throne of Asgard and disguised himself as Odin. In Ragnarok, when Loki wasn't at risk of being imprisoned, he was downright heroic by returning to help Thor save the Asgardians. It would be interesting to see what Loki would be like in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of New York, once he's safely free of the Mind Stone's influence and not living in fear of being imprisoned. In Endgame, we saw Thor taking off with the Guardians of the Galaxy, although we're not sure where he's going. Last time we checked, Loki was less than welcome on planet Earth, and that's where New Asgard is located. If Loki decides to return to this timeline, it's possible these siblings could reunite and find their next adventure somewhere together. Just where in the multiverse do you think the god of mischief Loki is? And will we ever see him in a Marvel movie again? Share your predictions with us in the comments section and then click on that subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Bye for now.